So we have the Olympics that are coming up here. So here's a question that I've wrestled with in my own mind. If there was any event in the Olympics that I would have had even the smallest chance ever of qualifying, what would that be? So any sport, any event, you get what I'm asking?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not saying we've ever been good enough to be Olympians, but if there was one event that you think that was my best shot to ever make the Olympics, what would it be?
Oh, that's easy for me. It would have been high jump because I did high jump in college.
Okay.
And one of the fun facts is actually, so I made it to state my senior year of high school, and I jumped the same year as the dude who ended up. Well, he ended up becoming a silver medalist at the Olympics in high jump, and then it was upgraded to gold because the dude who won, they found out later, I don't know, he did something, cheated. I don't know if he was juicing or what. So he actually technically is a gold medal winner in the Olympics in high jump and jumped the same year. I think he was a senior when I was a senior. Okay. He was Division I, I was Division II, so we didn't jump directly. Yeah. But I thought that was a cool thing. Like, his name was Eric Kennard from Ohio, and ended up.
How devastating is that he should have won the gold, should have had that experience there, should have had his national anthem
like kind of took the glory away from it.
Yeah, that's awful.
It's a huge bummer.
So what was your best jump? I'm just curious for high jump.
6'7".
That's crazy.
Yeah, 6'7". My best.
If right now I took you out and made you jump, what do you think you could do?
I don't know, man. That would be rough. It's been a lot. It's been since 2013. So you're talking 11 years since the last time I've high jumped.
You think you could clear 5 feet?
Oh yeah, easy. So I used to like you ever see them scissor kick the practice where they would run up and just jump over? My best, I think it was 6 foot. So me just literally scissor kicking over 6 foot was my best. So I think I could still probably get that. It might
There's
take
a part of me that wants to put this to the test. Like,
yeah.
Can we cut some B-roll into this?
Yeah,
I might get hurt doing it though, honestly, at this point in life. So I'm probably not going to try it. But,
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go back to you. Now I want you to think of a winter Olympic sport, okay? Because you actually had a good thing there. So give me a summer or winter, Chris.
Oh, I'd say, man, I don't know. I was never, like, I could not even fathom being good enough at anything to be in the winter or in any Olympics. If I could do an Olympic sport though, like if I was able to qualify for something, I would say winter would be make the hockey team.
Okay.
Summer would be.
They just brought skateboarding into it.
I said BMX biking.
Biking.
They just brought BMX into it as well. So I was not great at it, but I love doing it. So
yeah. This isn't about us being great.
Okay.
I'm just saying it's like the closest we could be.
I was like,
the closest you could do to compete.
Maybe the marathon now.
Yeah.
So.
I remember last Olympic. I think it was the last one, or maybe it was a couple of ones ago. Bill Murray tweeted out that in every single event, there should be an average person just to give us context for how good they are.
Much greater they are.
Yeah, that's what we need to be. For me, I think long jump.
Nice.
Long jump was one of the things in high school. So I started it as, I want to say a sophomore, maybe a junior. And we went to a meet, and my best friend, who was an all-state hurdler, said the coach had said they needed me to be in a fourth event. I was in some sprints and stuff, and they said, which one do you want to be in? And I was like, I'll do long jump. And so my best friend showed me how to do long jump that meet. Like, we went and practiced it like there. That's the only time I had ever practiced it. And I won that event. And I actually, in the next 3 years, never once lost in long jump.
That's crazy.
But I played baseball at the same time, so I could never go to regionals and states because I was doing baseball, and that was my primary sport. But it was like I had some odd gifting in coordination. I could sprint and just like it was coordinated enough to do it. So, and I always thought, but again, in context, I know I'd go there and get smoked. I'm just saying.
Do you remember what your PR was in long jump?
Oh man, I don't. I'd have to.
Because that was my secondary event.
Was it?
Yeah,
I set the record for our school. I do remember that.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Good for you. That's awesome.
I was actually part of
competition coming on. I said I feel competition coming on.
That's how I'm going to pull a hamstring. I'm going to do that. Then
that's a great way to do it too.
Yeah, he's going to do the high jump. I was actually part of. I think I was for 4 different records in our school. The other 3 were relays.
Yeah,
which was nice. But yeah,
I once ate 18 pancakes at an IHOP. That's the only record I ever held.
You ever had? Yeah.
Did you say a winner?
I want to do a winner. What do you think about winner?
For me, it would definitely be snowboarding. So like, snowboarding is something I've done enough of that like I'm fairly competent in. You know? I'm not saying I'm like an expert on double black diamond or anything, but like fairly competent. I could do most. Most.
My winter would be the one where you get to ski and shoot things.
Athlon.
Yeah, I do have good coordination with shooting, and so whether it be pistols or rifles.
Nice.
So again, that's the only reason why I think if I had a chance at anything. But the idea to me, what's crazy is that's like a European like dominated sport. If there's anything that has ever felt American to me,
Shooting
it's
guns.
skiing and shooting should
true.
be something that we
That's
dominate
true.
on. Like it
I
just feels
agree.
like something we would have made up.
Yes.
Like to go like,
Yeah.
you know how you can make this better?
Well, we're like
Give 'em a
globally
rifle.
notorious for like firearms, right? Like
I know.
that's the big joke is every American has a bunch of guns. So
Yeah,
like,
like
you would think that would be
the
true.
ratio of guns to people in America is
Yeah, it's ridiculous.
awesome.
That's awesome.
Sorry if you're watching and you're anti-gun, but
We'll get an email for that one.
yeah, exactly. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. This is the Branch Podcast where Anthony, Chris, and I sit down each week and we talk theology. And more often than not, it's attached to the previous Sunday's message. Or sometimes we just pick a different topic. So today, it's going to be a little bit of both. And so we're so glad that you're joining us. So guys, this is what I want to talk about. So on this past Sunday when I was teaching, I was talking about the idea of we have peace with God. And the idea, in order to fully understand why that's good news, we had to look at the negative that we were at one point enemies of God. But one of the points that I made is being an enemy of God is really a choice that we make. And the simple definition is you become an enemy of God when you set yourself up in opposition to what God is trying to do. So we think of enemies probably in a more emotionally driven place of like, I hate that person is my enemy. But I was kind of simplifying it down to say, no, that's not it. That's not the emotion that God ever reflects in Scripture, that he just simply hates us and wants to destroy us. But when we set ourselves up against him, then God will oppose us. And one of the things that I taught was the three responses of God is one, and I did this on Sunday, I did this in reverse order, but I'm going to reverse it right now. God loved his enemies, and that while we were enemies, Christ died for us. So he pursued us not to kill us or to destroy us. He pursued us to redeem us. But then the other part of it is God also at times was hands-on with his enemies, which meant he supernaturally resisted them. And other times he was hands-off, which meant he just left them to their own depravity, like what we see in Romans chapter 1. Okay, that was a very fast, quick review of that. Here's what the tension I felt in my own heart as a teacher and as a communicator. I'm sure you guys have felt this, where like you get done with the message and you're like, I wish I would have had another hour. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of questions. And so I had these natural questions that were coming in my head that I thought, this might be in the heart of people, is this idea that we're looking at this beautiful truth that we don't have to be enemies of God. God has reconciled us. But the truth is we make that choice at times to oppose God. How do we know when we are living in such a way that's opposing God? Because it can't be this is some of the questions people might have. Is it as simple as whenever something bad happens, that happens because God and me are now opposed? God's disciplining me or punishing me. Is there something else that plays into that? Because I think this is what often happens. I'm sure you guys have dealt with this. You teach a message, and the last person that it applies to is the one who comes up and feels it the most. They come up and they go, I must be God's enemy. And you're like, you are the sweetest, most obedient person I've ever met in my life. So I just want to talk about that today of what does it practically look like? I mean, we know God disciplines, we know God resists, but how can a person healthfully process what that looks like? So you get what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's my first question that I want to look at is let's just talk about the idea of God's discipline for a moment. What does the Bible say about God's discipline? What are some of the truths?
Yeah, so one of the ones that I know you mentioned recently is Hebrews 12, right? And it talks about this idea of specifically, and I think we've even mentioned this before in one of the other podcasts, it actually relates in the same way that an earthly father has a legitimate son, they discipline. And it actually draws this parallel, right, of like, if the father doesn't discipline the son, then it's an illegitimate son. And so there's this correlation really between the father and sonship, as well as a real, true, genuine, loving relationship, that if a father cares for his son, they will discipline them because it's for their own good. Right. And so I think we have to frame it in that context. And I think it's important to start there, because if you are in Christ, right, if you are a Christian, Romans 8 tells us that there's no longer any condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So I think we have to start there to say, okay, I'm a part of the household of God. I'm a child of God. I've been adopted into God's family. This is all really good news, right? This is the good news of God's grace. But the redemptive side of God moving in our lives when we sin or when we are in error is for the purpose of bringing us back to himself,
Right.
for the purpose of, put it this way, we're wandering off the path to bring us back onto the path. And this, I think this works not only with the conviction of the Spirit, but sometimes it is situational. The way that I've described what you talked about on Sunday morning, very similar, that would be the terms like active wrath versus passive wrath.
Right.
Active wrath, meaning that God, as you said, hands-on, is opposing you, opposing the situation, or passive wrath, God kind of leaves you to your devices and you begin to experience really the fallout of your own foolish decision-making. But if you are a part of God's household, if you're a child of God, if you're a Christian, that is for the purpose of leading you back to himself. And so sometimes pain reminds us, right, we've been focused on the wrong things. We've been living in a foolish manner. God is graciously actually reminding us through those moments, no, I have something more for you. I have something better for you. I love you too much to just allow you to go off the rails and really effectively destroy your own life.
Mm-hmm. I think too, like there are those moments where we actively are walking in a rebellion against God,
Sure.
and actively walking against what God's
Sure.
doing. But I think just even in our own nature, like Paul talks about our flesh, the frailty of our flesh. He talks about our weaknesses. He talks about the fact that we live in a broken world where we experience stress, we experience trauma, we experience tiredness. All these things kind of inhibit and hinder our obedience to God at times. Sometimes, and this is the analogy of like the commercial was Snickers, was a Snickers commercial. They said,
Right, yeah.
get Betty White, like
Yeah.
get her a Snickers, you know what I mean? But the idea that we get hangry. And so our behavior's affected based on
Sure.
just sheer normal, like
Right.
Everyday
variables. And so we have to take all that into consideration too, and understanding that we are not complete or whole into what God wants us to be. And so there's this level of God is constantly preparing us, training us, making us into something that has lack without him being involved. And so God is working us towards this ultimate good. And so we have these moments where like we may not be doing anything wrong at all, and it may just be the sheer fact that we're human beings
Sure.
that lack what's needed for spiritual things in that moment. And so we have to depend on God.
Let me try to make sure I understand you clearly. What you're talking about is just saying that not everything that we experience is the direct discipline of God. Is that what you're saying?
No.
In a sense? Okay.
That God uses even those things and he disciplines in those moments to train us for what he's guiding us towards, becoming like Christ.
But it's not necessarily some sort of punitive punishment for something wrong that we've done. And I think that is the distinction.
So it would be discipline in the fact, like, so the way that you described it, discipline is like a parent disciplining their child, correcting them and reshaping them in a direction.
Sure.
My thought process, like what I'm trying to describe is more the discipline of training, like the athlete who's preparing for something.
It's good.
Yeah.
And I think God does both of those. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So even Hebrews 12, what I love about that is it in the beginning. So it says like, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, and it just comes right after chapter 11, which is oftentimes referred to as the Hall of Faith, Hall of Fame, all these men and women who did incredible things. So he says, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off. It's this idea of both the sin that entangles and other things. So it's there are sinful things that slow us down, the weights of sin, but there are other things that entangle us. So not every single thing is evil of itself. But then it goes on to talk about discipline, and it says, and this is one of my favorite summaries of this. It says, endure hardship as discipline. So all bad things that happen, just use it as like in your own mindset that God is trying through this to teach me something. So if it's after the fact of disobeying God, it's the consequence to get us back. If it's apart from that, it's preparation for something. God's leading us towards something. Okay, what can that practically look like though? Because in someone's life, if someone is like, I oversleep. Is that God's discipline? Like my tire is flat in my car. Because you will have people that would think that way. Like my water heater goes out. That's a joke right now in our church. Like, is this discipline? Is this consequence? Like, even like some people would just say, like, every bad thing that happens to them, is this God's wrath? So someone betrays me, that relationship falls, I lose my job. Is this God punishing me? I mean, how can we process that? What is a person to do when something bad happens?
Yeah, I mean, I would say to a person, my estimation would be most things that happen to us for the general Christian who's in the church, most things that happen to us are not necessarily God actively working against us. Most things. That's my estimation. Now, if I was having a pastoral conversation with someone, I would ask about the context of the situation. But then one of the things that I would ask is, what is the trajectory and orientation of your life? In that, are you a person that's actively seeking the will of God? Are you a person who's actively responding to the promptings of God in your life, where you're seeking to be faithful, you're seeking to be obedient? Because you've talked about this before, right? It's kind of like the idea of you shouldn't have peace as a Christian if you're not actively trying to obey God. So I think there's a correlation there where it should absolutely leave room in your life for pause if you are actively not trying to pursue God and his calling on your life. Like if that's not the driving force of your life, well, there might be some things in your life that God is using to try to get your attention and to draw you back to himself. It's funny, the water heater one, I remember this is actually right when I started at the church. This is probably about a year ago, and it was shortly after we kind of changed the way that we did staff church on Mondays, but we were still doing kind of the small group thing where we'd break up and talk. And I remember one of the things that I had mentioned is trying to reframe even bad things that happen. So like the idea of a water heater, just using that as an example. One of the ways that I could look at that is, okay, my water heater failed. God is actively against me, or bad things always happen to me. Why am I always the one that bad things happen to? And sometimes we can have that woe is me attitude. But one of the things I said is I can also reframe this as a moment for not only gratitude, but also trusting in God's provision. So for me, it was saying like, man, I have a luxury of living in a house that has a hot water heater, and I have these luxuries and things that we just take for granted. But also as a moment to pause and thank God for his provision and ask God to provide in those moments if things are financially tight. And so even in those moments, do I believe in that case, for most people, it's God actively working against them? No, but I do think there's an opportunity there to learn something and to even ask God, what's going on in this situation? But going back to the beginning, I do think the first thing we should always be asking ourselves is, am I in pursuit of God? Am I in pursuit of God's will for my life? Because that is the first thing that always needs to be in place before we have the rest of that conversation.
Yeah, I would say even in the dependence portion of that, like what you were talking about, like learning dependence through those moments of difficulty, those moments of when things feel like they're falling apart. Even in that, there is a level of like it's a training moment, whether it's God directly doing it or not. It's an opportunity to learn and grow. Are we learning to trust God in the way that He calls us to? Are we dependent on Him the way that He calls us to be?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think in all reality, there are certain things that we cannot learn as Christians apart from the struggle. Apart from the pain, apart from
take
the
some time to unpack that, because I think that is a critical point people need to understand.
We just briefly had a few minute conversation earlier today, just knowing what we were going to talk about, and it is the James 1, it's the Romans 5, where there's this idea taught in Scripture that it struggles produce. James in chapter 1, he says like, count it all joy. I mean, why would I count it as joy? Well, then he follows up and says, basically the paraphrase is, it's going to produce some Christ-like character in you.
Yeah.
The things that you're going through is going to produce something in you. And I think that's important even to ask ourselves, what is the goal of following Jesus? Well, it's conformity to Christ. A discipleship is to look more like Jesus. The reality is we're probably not going to look more like Jesus if things always go our way 100% of the time, because we're not challenged with the adversity of things. We need to even have our own selfishness exposed. We need to learn oftentimes how much of our lives we base on convenience and things going the way that we want it to go. I mean, there's been so many times in my own life where I'm reminded of how selfish I am because things don't go my way. And those are opportunities. While I'm frustrated, I'm also grateful, because it's God's reminder saying, man, you have a long way to go. God is calling me deeper into faith. It's even the same joke we talk about, like if you pray for patience, God probably is not going to give you patience. He's going to put you in a situation where you have to learn patience, right? And so God gives us those moments to learn those different things. And that's a huge spectrum of things that we have to learn. But I really do believe oftentimes the greatest growth comes in those moments of adversity, those moments of challenge, the moments of suffering, the moments where the things that we trust in this world are often stripped away and we see them for what they are, which is an illusion. And we're brought back to where God wants us to be. And we need those reminders. I know in my life, if I didn't have those reminders, I would be led astray. There's so many times where if it wasn't for God's reminders in those moments to put my focus back on Him, man, I don't know where I would be.
Yeah. I think underlying all of that is the idea that God has ultimate best for us. And I think struggle oftentimes comes when, like, it's like exactly what you said. We get frustrated because the world's not going the way that we want it to.
Yeah.
And realizing that sometimes our desires, our hope for what life becomes is not the same thing as what God wants for our lives. It's not the best thing for us. And so coming to terms with understanding that God might be shaping something different in us, and it takes us going through that stripping away process, that struggle to come to the place where we can learn to trust God, that he is ultimately leading us towards the best thing possible. And that's a vibrant, life-giving relationship with him where we become everything we were designed to be. And anything short of that, God doesn't stop or allow us to exist in that, because it's not it's not our best, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So a person that's watching this or listening to this, and they go, okay, unquestionably, there are some bad things that are happening in my life. Talk them through the practical steps of what that looks like. Because it's very easy for us to say, like, yeah, that's God trying to get your attention. And then the person's like, okay, but what do I do? How do I know that? What would you guys suggest? What would be some practical steps that if someone is feeling, whether it's the direct, like divine wrath of God, as if you want to use like real biblical terms, but also the lack of blessing. Because I think the lack of blessing is also a sign to us at times that like because God has promised to bless us. So what does a person do when they just go, you know what, this season does not feel blessed. This season feels like it's coming against me. What would you suggest they do in order to have God search their heart and reveal things to them? I
would just start simply with, God, what are you trying to teach me in this moment? And I think being able to go to that place and say, like, is there something that you want me to take away from this? And allowing God to speak to you in that moment, to direct you in that process.
So I'm going to boil it down even more. So you're saying in prayer time?
Yes, in prayer time.
Take some separate time and ask God that question.
Yeah, there's been times in my life where like it feels like it's the water heater and the car and the know what I mean? And those are moments where I've gone, okay, God, like I know I've been faithful in this area with my finances. I've tithed, I've done all the things. Like, what's going on? Like that it seems like there's just a consistent thing going on here. And so it has been taking that separate time to go, what are you trying to teach me here? And sometimes I need to be more disciplined with my finance. You know what I mean? Like if I had made better decisions, I would have the money to take care of those things. Like, and it wouldn't be a stressful thing. Sometimes it's just a season of what it is, and God's just like, trust me through it. Yeah. And it's taking that time to ask him and seek, like you said, Anthony, seek him and say, God, what is it that you're doing in this moment? Because he's always doing something. It's whether it's his direct hand or whether it's just part of living in a broken world. God will always use it for our good. That's Romans 8:28.
Yeah.
That everything that we experience is for the purpose of making us more like Christ and drawing us closer to God. So,
and I would flesh out that concept. So like Romans 8:28. I mean, we've talked about this before. What is common among Christians, and even I would say just people in general, like we love to post our favorite Bible verses that are kind of me-centric, right? It's like this talks about how great my life is going to be. So like Romans 8:28 is one of those, but you actually break down even what is said in that verse alone. For those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Like, I think that's super important. Like God is working all things together for the good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. Well, it's not just a general, all things are working to good for everybody, because if you are actively...
Are you sure? Because Jeremiah 29:11 says, I know the plan... No, sorry.
For those who are watching, the joke is, I always say is, so tell me about your time in Babylonian exile. Tell me how hard that was.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're good. But I do think it's important because people can be disillusioned to faith then, and even to Christianity, because if you plaster a Bible verse like Romans 8:28, all things working together for good, but you're living a selfish lifestyle. You're living a lifestyle where you're not serving God. You're not seeking God. You don't care about God's will. You're doing things your own way, and things continue to fall apart around you, and you continue to reap what you sown in a life of sin and rebellion. That doesn't feel like God's working all things together for good. Well, because he's not, because you're not conforming to his will. You're not seeking him. You don't have a relationship with him. And so there is that unpleasant aspect of Christianity. And again, even touching on what you talked about, where part of that is God giving us up to our own devices. Like if you want to walk in active rebellion against him, if you're living in a way that is opposing his desire and good design, well, you're going to reap the consequences of that. So that is one aspect. So I would say a part of that conversation would be, again, trying to give them some sort of test and trying to clarify, like, are you pursuing after the Lord? Is this something you're actively doing? I do think a second level of that is, if you are doing that, have you simply just asked God? I think for a lot of Christians, we don't really believe or we don't actively practice the idea of talking to God in a way where we expect answers, right? Yeah. And I think that's such an important distinction, where we say, God, I believe that you can speak to me. And here's the good news. If God is the one that's actively doing something to get your attention, wouldn't he joyfully want to respond to us when 100%. We finally stop and say, Lord, show me what you're doing here. Obviously, you're trying to get my attention. Obviously, you're trying to show me something. And here's the reality. If not, if you've searched your heart, if you've searched your situation, and maybe it is just the brokenness of the world you live in, and it's one of those things where, man, it's just been a rough season, you can still ask God, okay, God, as you said, what are you trying to teach me in this? What are you trying to form in me throughout this season of life? Because we do see that in Scripture. Like even the classic story of Joseph. Joseph wasn't doing anything sinful or wrong. Joseph actively is trying to obey God all throughout the story, and things continually go wrong with him. Yeah. Right? It's one of the most startling things when you read that story. It's frustrating because you're like, man, Joseph time and time again makes the right decision and gets bad results. Like things are not going well for him. And yet the whole consistent teaching of the story is, but God was with Joseph, but God was with Joseph, but God was with Joseph. And then God is ultimately working out something great and beautiful and ultimately for his good, a great illustration of Romans 8:28. But the importance there is Joseph is in tune with God, right? Joseph doesn't run from God. He is actually leaning in closer. And because of that, God uses his circumstances to bring about great good.
Well, and I think that takes us to the story of Jesus. I mean, Jesus, who is the most obedient person ever. You know what I mean? He's led to a cross in his obedience, but in the same time, like it looks like all of these people, the religious leaders, Rome, like he was actively opposing them, and so it looked like things were happening in his life, even though it was part of God's plan. You know what I mean? But there's this level of like Jesus, even in being a part of God's plan, still experienced suffering and struggles. Yeah. To the other point, and back to your original question, I think seeking God in his word is an important part too, because remembering God's promises and remembering the things like Romans 8:28 for believers. I make sure I qualify that for you. So, but you know what I mean? But like finding those promises of God and remembering that like the discipline of the Lord is for those he loves. The way that God is always faithful. God is always working to make us more like his son. You know what I mean? So like those promises play an important role in not only it plays an important role in the discovery of what God is doing, because without the promises, I think it goes back to the fear of like, God's just punishing me. Yeah. You know what I mean? It reforms how we think about it and allows us to come to the place where we can go, okay, God, this sucks, but I can trust you with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just don't think in Scripture, from my understanding, that there's ever a place where you see God simply punitively punishing someone for punitive reasons alone this side of eternity. I do think in eternity there's going to be the justice of God, and there's not going to be redemption in that, in the sense of like you're going to face it. Yeah. But this side of eternity, like you just can't find it. God's like redemptive. Even, I mean, the story I alluded to on Sunday, the story of Jonah, he's redeeming Nineveh. Nineveh is like the most wicked of wicked nations, and God still cares about them. I mean, the story of Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon, that God humbles him because God is trying to do a work in his heart, and he's a wicked leader. And then we see later Cyrus, who we don't know much about him, but somehow God stirs his heart to build him a temple. And you realize God's working with every nation, not just the Jewish people. He's working with these other nations because there is a redemptive heart to God with all people. Okay. Both of you have said something that I think in our everyday language, like I know exactly what you mean, but I want you just to explain a little bit more. What does it look like to create space to hear from God? Because again, I'm trying to be super practical for people, because what we've described is, okay, things are going bad in your life. You pause, you take some prayer time to say, God, show me if there's something you want to teach me, even getting into God's word and reading it. But what does it practically look like in your own personal life? So I'm asking you two individually, what does it practically look like to create space for God to speak to you? And then what does that look like when you think God is speaking to you? Now, I know we've had a previous podcast where we talked about hearing from God, so they can go back and watch that. But I'm just saying for you guys right now, what does that practically look like to create space, and how does God speak to you?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have anything flashy. Like that's the thing. I think a lot of times when people hear that question, like they expect it to be this, multi-step, 12-step process of what that looks like. For me, I mean, it really is just creating times of solitude. Usually I have a couple of them. Usually one of them is in the morning. That's usually when I read scripture and we'll have kind of a initial prayer time for the day. And one of the things that I try to do is really kind of surrender my agenda and saying, all right, God, whatever you have today, like I want you to lead me. I want to be spirit led. I want to exhibit the fruit of the Spirit in my interactions with people. And so I would say, whether you want to call that a prayer of surrender, a prayer of yielding, where I'm just saying to God, okay, today belongs to you. I'm acknowledging you in this moment. And I don't want to live apart from you today and do things in my own strength or my own wisdom. And then one of the things that I've tried to incorporate more of, and I don't always do this, is later in the day, a time of reflection. And so recently, like before bed, one of the last things I try to do is go into, so upstairs we have like a loft, and it's basically a guest bedroom / my office now, which is nice to have a space of my own. But I'll just go up there and turn on some ambient music, and that's really where I will not only pray, but take more times of extended pause and listening. And so for me, it is creating not only that space for solitude, but space for reflection over maybe decisions that I've made, not so great moments, inviting God into those to speak. So to literally saying, Lord, these are some things that are going on in my life right now, and I just need clarity in them. I need to understand what's going on. I need to understand what you're doing. And sometimes there might be an impression upon my spirit in those moments to where I would say God gently nudges you in a certain direction, right? It's kind of like start pulling at the thread. I start to see something. Rarely is it the full picture instantaneously. But sometimes it might start there, and then it might be through affirmations of a conversation you have with someone else in the church. Might be one of you guys, like those types of conversations that then almost confirm, oh man, this is something I've been thinking about, something I've been praying about. And so I think God oftentimes internally and externally will confirm some of those things. And even situationally, like where you find yourself, I think about the many times in my life where I've, the classic closed and open doors, like God, make it abundantly clear to me. There's times where literally in prayer, I'm not joking, or say, Lord, I'm dumb. Like I need you to make it abundantly clear. I can't always figure this out. I need you to make it clear to me so that I understand what you're doing and what you're saying and where you're leading me to be. So yeah, I don't have anything flashy. I don't have any bells and whistles in my time. It is just creating the space and trying to humble myself before God, acknowledge my need for him, and inviting him into those everyday moments and spaces of my life where I'm just saying to God, I can't, the thing that I tell people is I just really believe if you seek to honor God in every sphere of your life, if you are willing to surrender that, God is so faithful and kind to honor you in return by responding to those prayer requests.
I think two of the things that you mentioned, so the morning session, the evening session, one of the things I think so many people miss out on is if you just surrender yourself to the busyness of life, it is really hard to hear from God.
Yeah.
Because busyness competes with God's voice in our lives.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just want to speak for you in the sense of like, you have a lot of reasons to be busy in your life. I mean, you have 3 young children.
Yeah.
I know your personality is wired in such a way you like projects and doing things. So you're actually saying no to some other things so that you can say yes to that time with God, both in the morning and the evening. And I think that's critical to it because, again, if you just get so busy and you're going from place to place to place, I don't think that you'll miss the voice of God. God will be speaking to you, and you'll lose His voice in the busyness of life.
Yeah.
How about you? What does hearing God look like?
I was going to say, I would echo everything that you do, like that you said. The idea of having specific time set aside. What I'd add to it is, like, for me, and this is recent as of like last night, the ability to allow my emotions to drive my need for prayer. And so, like, if I'm in the moment and I feel anxious, and if I'm in the moment, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, if I'm feeling exhausted, like, I know those are moments for me to stop and just take a second and just take it to God. I'm sitting at the table last night. Everybody went to bed. The house was quiet. I'm tired and I'm ready to go to bed and I'm working on homework. And so like everything inside of me is like, I want to go to bed. I still had stuff to finish off. You know what I mean? And so like I'm frustrated in my mind and my heart. And I'm like, God, I know that you've called me to this. I know that you've led me like to this. I know it's from you. Like, sustain me.
Yeah.
I need you right now. Like,
Yeah.
I need you to sustain me. And so like a lot of time, and he met me in that moment. It wasn't an audible voice. It wasn't anything like that, but I had everything I needed to finish the homework I needed for that night, to get things. I needed to send some stuff off for the podcast. I was able to get that done. Like, and it just like in that moment, God met me there and helped me through that struggle that I was facing. But as far as like so that's one way that I've seen God speak and move in that arena. The other way is God layers things for me. I'm like you, like I'm like, okay, God, you have to make it clear. And so when I start seeing multiple different ways of the same thing showing up, if I'm listening to a message and my heart is convicted and stirred per a topic that God is dealing with me on, if it comes up in conversation in the office, if Cassie brings it up, now I'm starting to pay attention to be like, okay, God, this is you trying to get my attention about something I'm going through. So I really try to be attuned and attentive to those things. And that's in league with taking time in the morning, making sure I'm being quiet when I need to throughout the rest of the day. So
I think like what you said, even just pointing out the idea of being attentive, right? You have to be, if you want to hear from God, you have to be attentive to God. So whatever the situation is, even in the context of this conversation, the discipline of God, you have to be able to create that space, and even like just to put up your antenna.
And posture.
Yeah. Put up your antenna, if you will. Like, you're not going to hear from God unless you're intentionally creating space and time for that to happen. And I think even the posture of like today, like I am acknowledging my own tendency to do things my own way. I'm acknowledging my own tendency to be selfish. I'm acknowledging my own tendency to live out of my own strength and sufficiency. And so by starting the day saying, all right, God, have your way, lead me, direct me. If there's things you want to show to me today, like I am saying, God, I want to hear from you. I want my life to be directed by you. And I think you have to have that posture. Otherwise, I don't know if you should expect to hear from God. I don't know if you should expect, unless he, somehow drastically gets a hold of your attention. And sometimes God does. And sometimes he needs to do that in all of our lives, where he uses external circumstances to remind us, oh man, my priorities have not been straight. Like I have not been doing the things that I'm supposed to do. And while I might not like the thing that I'm going through or the circumstance I'm experiencing right now, I am thankful for the reminder of God's grace and his call back to himself. I've been there a lot of times in my life where I'm like, man, I don't love this season, but I am thankful for the result of it because God is using it to draw me back to him. And that's just the kindness of God, even in those moments of challenge or difficulty.
Yeah, I love the idea of even prepping your heart for God to speak. I really do, because that's one thing I've often wondered, like in my life, where it seems like all of a sudden I hear God's voice, boom, 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 and like all these different things. And I think, is that because God is doing that so obvious, or is it just simply because God would have already done that? I've just now softened my heart to hear him. You know what I mean? I think about the story in the Bible of Jacob, who has this encounter with God in the middle of like fleeing his brother. And he's like, I didn't even know God was here. And so he like has this like spiritual moment. And the reality is, well, God can be everywhere. God can interact wherever you are, Jacob. And the same thing in our lives. It's like, I know for me, when I ask things of God, then I will hear it in sermons that I listen to. I will see it in the scriptures that I read. I will have it in conversations where you come in and like, you guys are talking about something and I'm like, oh, that's weird. That's exactly what I just prayed. But the truth of it is, you guys might have still had that conversation, but now I've like primed my heart to hear it, because I'm saying, God, speak. Speak to me, and he'll speak through my relationship with my wife and different situations.
Well, I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Matthew. It's the idea that God's posture towards us on this side of eternity is consistently and always to redeem us and to call us back to him.
Right.
And so there is this level of like anything and everything could be a way that God speaks to us and draws us back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Is drawing us back to him. That's his nature. That's what he infuses, like his spirit infuses the world and is working all the time in all these different ways. And it's always about redemption and always about drawing us back. And so like in what ways are we being attentive and attuned to what he's doing and how he's working?
Yeah, I would even say one of the things that I think happens in maturity is instead of waiting for the consequence before anything happens, you ask God, right? Like one of the things I've loved in this season of my being a parent. So my oldest is has just completed his freshman year of college. He'll be going back for a sophomore year here soon. Titus, my second son, is going into his senior year. Both of them now are being what's the word I'm looking for? Proactive in decisions that they're making in their life, coming to me as their dad, asking me ahead of time, what's your thoughts on this? And I've really appreciated it. I mean, it's honoring because your kid is asking your opinion, but I know even as a father who has worked so hard to shape them in maturity and in spiritual disciplines, it's nice to be able to have that input before they go and make a bad decision and then come and say, like, oh, I messed up. How do I get out of this? How do I fix this? And I mean, this is how God is with us. God would much rather not have to discipline us. He would much rather ahead of time guide us. And so those habits of getting to God and saying, God, things aren't going well, show me. Hopefully that will turn in all of our lives to preemptive, where we're saying ahead of time, God, show me.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't have to learn the hard way. All right, here's the final. I'm gonna ask two questions. One is I would love for you guys each. This would be the second question. Is just to share a personal time, if you guys are willing to do this, of when you have felt the discipline of God in your life and how you navigated through that. But the question before that is the second part of what I taught on Sunday is God can be hands-on, he can be hands-off. If someone is just feeling so spiritually dry, numb, not hearing from God, just like almost like that feeling of like I'm in the wilderness, it's chances are God's hands have come off of them. What is there anything different, or would you just give them the exact same advice you gave, or is there anything specific you would say to someone in that situation that just goes, you know what, I don't feel any draw toward God. I don't feel God's presence at all. I don't know what to do.
Yeah. So the second question, I'll have to think on the first. I mean, certainly there have been, seasons where I'm like, all right, God, it feels like you're trying to do something here, you're trying to get my attention. But the second question, I think, so this goes back to even our conversation a couple of weeks ago on the topic of like confession and repentance. I do think for a lot of people, repentance is the answer. And so even as I was thinking about like my own reflection time, which I've really come to value at the end of the day, just because there's an element of that where you're able to stop and pause and think, what did today consist of? How did I operate? What were the feelings that were driving me? Was I anxious? Was I angry? Was I irritable? What was going on inside of my heart? How did I treat my wife? How did I treat my kids? Should I have said that in that one conversation in the office? I need to stop talking so much. Like all those types of things. I would say there's an element of that where people really need to examine their own lives. And this goes back into the same concept of just most people not taking quiet times of solitude. Yeah. And I think a lot of us are running really on empty, but also just running without intentionality. And so we're operating out of our emotions. We're operating out of our situations. We're doing things for all kinds of reasons, but we haven't stopped to really think about them. So I think for some people, even if someone is in a season where they're wondering, things are hard, like I would go through them depending on what the situation is. So if it's relational, I would say, are there elements of this relationship where you need to take ownership? Is there sin here that you need to confess and acknowledge? Are there things that God is revealing to you that you have maybe hardened your heart against? And I know you talked about that. Like, are there things that God has brought up to you in the past where he's convicted you on that you've continued to persist in? And so I think that's a big part of it, is that breakdown of, are there things in your life where you've basically said to God, no thanks, and held him at bay, and you've continued to persist in that. And so God in many ways has taken his hands off you, and you're now experiencing the effects of that. I do think it's important to understand God always wants to move towards us, but sometimes he will allow those things to happen. It's kind of like having a child, and I've used this example a lot. This one is recently very relevant to me. So in our yard, we have an insane amount of clover, which means there's about 1 billion honeybees in our yard. And my kids love to run around barefoot. And I'm like, listen, guys, you are going to get stung by a bee because it's inevitable. And in the last 2 weeks, all 3 of my children have gotten stung.
And one of my children at your house.
Yes, and also Nora. Yeah. But I've continued to give them this message: wear shoes in the yard. Guys, it takes 2 seconds. Put your shoes on, wear shoes in the yard. And so there's a part of me where I'm like, okay, I don't want you to be stung by a bee, but I'm not going to jump in there every single time. At some point, like, I'm going to let you learn. You need to learn from this experience. I think that in some ways it is an illustration of how God often works with sin and rebellion. You're going to experience the results of this. And so anyway, I say all that to say we need to take inventory of our lives. We need to have honest conversations with trusted individuals. We need time for self-reflection and to ask whatever area, if it's financially, you use that example. Am I honoring God with my money? Am I being reckless with how I'm spending the rest of my money if I am being generous and honoring God with my money? In my relationships, am I loving my wife? Am I serving her? Am I so you can go down the line and begin to ask yourself and reflect on those things. And I do think that is partnered with inviting God into the conversation and saying, Lord, as best I know how, I'm trying to see these things. Please reveal these things to me. If there's areas of sin in my life that I need to repent of, I want to do that. But for some people, I think the truth is they know there's some things and they've persisted in them and they've rebelled in them. And so I do think all that to say confession, repentance is one of the main pathways back to God. And God is always gracious in wanting to meet us there. And so I think that's a big piece for a lot of people.
Yeah.
To answer your first question, I would say that I feel like I'm in a perpetual state of discipline from God, if I can say that.
So you're really bad.
Yeah, I'm terrible. More intensely
you're a
so
really
now.
bad sinner.
And what it is like I feel like God is trying to, and this might be one of the frailty things, less than disobedience. Though I think they kind of pair sometimes, and so there's always been a natural propensity in me to want to avoid the things that are stressful, that are overly difficult, that feel overwhelming to me. And I feel like God has been trying to discipline me and teach me how to live underneath the weight of those things and how to operate well underneath the weight of those things. And so there is this constant wrestle in my heart of like, this would be easier without feeling overwhelmed about this thing. This would be, and God's keeps saying, stay in this. And what I feel like he's doing is he wants to strengthen me and he wants to train me and prepare me for other things. You know what I mean? But at the same time, like there's that propensity to not want to bite into that. Right. So it's this constant thing where God just keep coming to me, keep resting in me, keep believing that I'm with you, keep believing in the calling that I put on your life, stay in this even when these things get difficult. And so like that's the thing that he's been working on me and strengthened me in all these different ways that I find myself wanting to run away from struggle. Mm-hmm. God keeps pulling me back into it to show me like I can sustain you in this and we can be okay. And so that's a place that God has disciplined me right now. And everything that he's doing, all that he teaches me in my quiet time, all that he teaches me through messages, all that he teaches me in the anxiety that I feel throughout the day, like it's just him constantly both giving his promises to always be with me, but also the reminders of, no, this is what we're doing. Like we are being disciplined, and like I'm disciplining you in this. And it leads to those moments where it feels like God feels far away sometimes, where where you're like, oh God, are you still here with me? But what I always lean back on is like, this is not something that's new to the people of God. Right. And so like, if somebody's out there and they're like, I feel so distant from God, if you care, that's a great thing, because that means that you have the tools that you need to come back to God. Yeah. And it's just the consistent crying out to God. It's the Psalms. I mean, the Psalms are full of, God, where are you? Yeah, God, why are you so far off? Why are you so far off? Like, God, why have you allowed me to experience this? Mm-hmm. I mean, even Jesus quotes the Psalm on the cross. Why have you forsaken me? And so like, and the truth of the reality is God didn't forsake him there. You know what I mean? Like God was present. And that's the beauty of the Psalms. It's like, even despite this, what it feels like to us in this moment, God's presence, God's love, God's grace, God's mercy, who God is always there to provide for us what we need in those moments, whether we feel it in that moment or not. Yeah. We can trust God in that.
Yeah, I would say, so one of the examples that as you were talking that I thought of, and I've shared this before, was in 2020. So I got COVID, the original variant. So that was super fun. But I had long hauler symptoms for quite a few months after that. And so one of the things that it did for me is I remember having a conversation with a person. Micaiah makes fun of me for this, but I actually joined a long haulers Facebook group because I just wanted to know, like, it was so new at the time. I'm like, how are other people experiencing these things? How long have they gone on? Has anyone gotten through these symptoms? Is it now fine? There's a curiosity there just for my own sake. Cause I'm like, am I going to live the rest of my life experiencing some of these things? And I know, unfortunately, some people are. And so I had, some of those questions, some of those wrestlings, but I remember having a conversation with somebody on that group. And, I said, one of the things that dawned on me when I have this feeling of why me was the response, why not me? And it was me reflecting on like, do I feel so entitled that I don't feel like God should allow this to happen to me, or that God can't use this situation? But one of the things that it did is it stripped me in a lot of ways of my worldly thinking. And so at the time I would have been 29, and you're thinking I'm in the midst of having children and young family. And somewhat you still think you're invincible, right? You still feel young. And so that to me it really threw me off. And I really started to think about my own mortality, which I know for some people is like a morbid thought, but it really made me hone in on, okay, what am I living for? What do I want my life to be about? If I die tomorrow, like this thing kills me and I'm not the same, or whatever happens going forward, what am I living my life for? And so that season was really sweet in a lot of ways because it caused me to reflect on my life and what my value system was and what I was living for. And even the plans that I had been making or thinking about for my future, I realized oftentimes were not in alignment with maybe what God has for me, or even in a more worldly sense. And so God used that illness and my experience of that really to strip away a lot of worldly things that not necessarily bad things, but just things where you're kind of building your own kingdom here on earth. And rather than seeing yourself as an exile, you're here for a temporary amount of time. It really stripped a lot of that thinking. And so I've shared that with a lot of people. I was grateful for that, for God to shift my perspective and use that to clarify, okay, what are you really living for? And if you were to die tomorrow, are the things you're living for now, the way you're treating people, is that how you would want to be remembered? So that was really helpful for me to even just think about my own legacy in my life and how I was living.
Yeah. Yeah, I know for me, one of the difficult seasons where I felt like God's discipline, and this was, it could be one part in response to what I had done and then one part in preparation for the future. It's a story I've shared numerous times, but I went through like a very real mental and emotional breakdown years ago when we had bought this building, and then the financing to remodel it fell through. And I felt such pressure as the lead pastor. It was like, I'm sure other people felt the pressure, but it was like overwhelming to me of, man, all the promises we made, all the vision that we've cast, all of that just felt like it had come crashing down. And it was such an overwhelming season. Now, in that season, I have never prayed more. I've never been more purposed in God's presence. I took a posture of self-reflection. God, show me. I mean, I prayed the prayers. Like, if it's me and I'm hindering, then let me know. I'll resign. I'll move. Like, I'll do whatever. And in that season, God allowed us as a church to get so much more discipline in our structures and systems and finances, just raised to a level of maturity of just what we needed to do to get ready for that. But also in that season, one of the things that God revealed to me is that I am going to be in a perpetual place of being uncomfortable as a lead pastor. Like, he just basically taught me and reminded me, or, showed me for the first time, that from this point forward, he's called me to lead. And so I'm never going to be in a place of total comfort. And initially, I mean, that's a horrible thought. I love comfort, right? Yeah. But he was just showing me this side of eternity. This is my calling in life. What it did, though, is it prepared me for the next seasons, that I just know now, like, there's a part of me that would love to just settle in every season of success, if we can use that term. But I just know God's going to keep giving me vision for the next season. But I'm thankful that in that season that seemed like everything was chaotic and uncertain, when God came through and showed in his perfect timing and provision that he had our back, that he knew exactly what he was doing, it's always going to be that way. I'm going to be uncomfortable. God is in control. And it really has brought a level of peace to me that I didn't have back then. So even right now, you guys know on staff, I've consistently talked about, there's a lot of uncertainty that's hard for me in my natural flesh, but I am not nearly like I once was. It's not the pain, the stress. I'm not falling in on myself. It's like, okay, God, this is real. But like, so every day when I'm praying, I'm going, okay, God, I trust you again. I trust you again. Will you provide this? And I'm thankful for that. That previous season that I hated, of discipline of what we needed to change and what to prepare me for. I hated that season. I look back now on it with fondness because of what it produced.
Yeah.
And so like in my life now, it's like that same rhythm. When things feel unsettled, I can go to God because I have that confidence. And so I'm thankful for that. And I'm thankful that God loves me enough to be actively involved in my life. I mean, I even said it on Sunday, the idea of God taking his hands off is way more terrifying than
100%.
God hands-on resisting me, because hands-on to me feels like he's going to get my mental and emotional attention. Hands off is like, that's terrifying. That would be comparable to my wife saying she gave up on our marriage. Like that, the devastation of like, I'd rather fight with Mary than Mary say like,
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
I'm done. Yeah, I'm just done. Like that would be heartbreaking to me. And so, so that discipline was tough, but it was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other thoughts you want to give anyone before we close?
I think even the conversation around discipline, another synonymous term would be, pruning that Jesus talks about in John 15, and just reminding people that even in the context of that specific discourse that Jesus is giving, he says, those who are bearing fruit, like he will prune so that they bear more fruit.
Yeah.
And so even,
what a cool idea.
Yeah. And even just that reminder of like, again, don't always assume the worst. Yes, have a posture of humility, have a posture of reflection, have the posture where you're saying, God, I believe you can speak. And I believe if you're trying to get my attention, that you will honor me enough in this as I ask, you will respond. But don't always assume the worst. Don't start with like, we have to have a proper view of God, as you talked about earlier, like that even the promises of Scripture, the Romans 5, the James 1, where, I mean, for James to say to count it all joy when you go through trials of various kinds, like joy is not the natural response when I'm going through a hard season. But I love that he follows that up with really a synonymous thing of what Jesus is talking about, producing this fruit, doing something inside of us. And just being able to entrust our lives to God. If your greatest desire is to conform your life to the will of God and to look more like Jesus, just trust that he is hands-on in the best of ways.
Yeah.
And just be open to that. Be open to what God is doing, because he's trying to form more of Christ in you. And that as that happens, you're going to bear more fruit and be more effective for his kingdom and make more of a difference in your everyday life.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, I mean, the idea of count it all joy, that promise only makes sense if God is redemptive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense any other way, right? I mean, Paul, rejoice in our suffering. It doesn't make sense unless there's a redemptive God on the other side, which is such comforting news. So, well, thank you guys so much for your insights. Thank you for joining us. We really do appreciate it. We know that this podcast has connected with a lot of people because you guys are kind enough to let us know. But if it has connected with you, we do ask you to share it. Share it on social media, pass it on to family and friends, because we do believe the truth of God's word is what we can build our lives upon, and it prepares us for the storms of life. So we thank you so much for connecting, and we hope to see you next week. God bless.